Hello and welcome to Diaspora Network Television. My name is Jermaine Nkrumah and you're watching Diaspora Weekly. And today we have, how many people do you know called Miss Mogul? But you know what? Once you get to meet her and hear her story, you would understand that she could not pick or they could not pick a better name to describe. But I'm delighted to welcome Charity Smith to the show today. Welcome, Charity.
Thank you, Jermaine. It truly is a delight and an honor to be with you this bright and early Sunday morning. I'm not sure when the audiences will see it, but it certainly is a pleasure to be with you, and I'm delighted to have this conversation with you.
Very good, very good. Thank you. Let's start with the name Miss Mogul. Where did it come from?
So everyone asked that question.
Uh-huh.
So one of my lives was in teaching university, the university level of business corporate development. And the name actually came from one of my students who was really trying to be kind of tongue in cheek with how I was challenging him in his paradigms. And I told him when he was telling me about some of his ideas and he wanted to be promoted, he was in my class because he had to take some corporate development hours in order to get this promotion. And so when I started to challenge his paradigm and telling him he was thinking too small and perhaps he should think this way and that way and pivot here and there. Oh, you think you're a mogul, right? All right. So, and he did this. He said, so how about this, everybody? We'll just call her Miss Mogul. And I told him, thank you. Thank you very much. I received that. And I received the honor of that. And it really started out kind of as a tongue in cheek, but I think with that, though, I gained his respect, and I get where you're coming from with that. But my premise is still the same. You're thinking too small, and I'm still going to challenge you. I'm still going to push you.
Oh, so that was, I guess that was designed to get you to back up. But you accepted it and said, you think that's going to stop me?
I leaned into it. Wow. I leaned into it. So you got the wrong one, sir. Wow. But whatever.
And how did your relationship with him turn out moving forward from that point?
I gained his respect. Okay. I actually was honored to gain his respect as a business leader and ultimately as a mentor in business leadership. And so while it started out a little bit tense and tumultuous because you'd have to know his background, he comes from a very male-driven patriarchal background in society. And so it was already a challenge for him to be in the class taking these principles from a woman. And so that was already somewhat kind of challenging him from several vantage points. But after we spent some time together and really had some in-depth conversations about why I'm here, why he's here, and I'm here to be a resource and not to just be something that or someone that challenges you, but really to be a resource to you, I earned his respect, and to this day, we still talk.
Isn't that interesting? I have a similar relationship, even though ours did not start as tense. But I have a relationship with one of my first professors in class to today. He uses me as an example in his class. But anyway, interestingly, we begin this Diaspora Weekly by allowing the interviewee to talk about themselves, but it looks like we already dive right into it. So why don't we take it from here?
Sure. So I think we met when I was pursuing or still am pursuing a larger project. So let me back up a little bit about me. My 20 years as an entrepreneur started in consulting, then moved to real estate investing, and now in developing. And so that then led me to do work internationally as well as here in the States. I've been very fortunate and blessed to expand those operations into 2 other states and now going into Ghana, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that. But I'm also a conference speaker. I've been very blessed to be a featured economic development, women's leadership speaker in over 30 countries around the world, talking to not just the diaspora, but many populations about what it takes now to be a true global leader in business. What's the paradigm? What's the profile? What should we be pursuing? How do we do this in the era of now COVID and post 2020 uprisings, 2021, the elections for those of us who are in the US and you all who see this abroad? We have to now have a different paradigm in my mind and how we pursue business development, business leadership, etc. And so my life in this next season, this next, what I call the decade of achievement, Jermaine, the next 10 years of my life are focused on really pursuing what it truly means to have true economic development come to the diaspora and to the mother continent of Africa. What does that truly, moving past all of the pontification, moving past all of the red tape and what we say we can do, what we can't do. All right, fine. We've hashed that and now it's dead as far as I'm concerned. How do we now truly develop economic ties that bring us together, not just culturally, not just socially? We don't want to just vacation together, but how do we truly build a lasting economic global legacy that is respected and honored, not just in, again, the diaspora, but truly globally? And so that's really what I'm focused on now. And had the blessing of hosting a global summit here in Houston a couple of weeks ago, where we had some wonderful leaders from Ghana and the US, UK, Botswana was in the mix, Latin America was in the mix, where we talked about now how do we 10x our businesses and grow them now exponentially in the decade of achievement to truly have global economic bridges. And so that's really what I'm about now. So it started in the classroom. Now the world is the
The
stage.
real world. Very good. You know, when talking about paradigm shifts and economic
Yes.
development, and I can't help but pivot to the pandemic.
Hmm.
When this pandemic started, now we heard the wife of what's this rich guy's name? Sometimes I blank out,
Bill
forget.
Gates,
Bill Gates uh,
Belinda Gates.
project, Melinda Gates project that oh God, she was scared that people were going to be dying on the streets of Africa, and not only did that not happen, the numbers in Africa were far less. And in the
Mhm.
beginning, they said, "Oh, they're not reporting it correctly." I lived in Ghana. We did not see dead bodies on the street, and our numbers to this day, 2 years after the pandemic, I
Yes.
don't think Ghana has even crossed 3,000 for a population of 31 million. So if this pandemic ran ravage all over the world, but did not barely touched Africa, what does that say to you, and what does it teach us about self-reliance and what we can do to really uh, catapult our economic development on the continent?
So first, the first thing that whole narrative says to me is speak to people on the ground and don't always buy into the media's narrative.
That's it.
You really do. That's the first bit of wisdom that I can give. If you truly want to know what's happening in an area, you speak to people on the ground and not necessarily to people who have various narratives that they need to push for
Mhm.
a plethora of reasons.
Mhm.
I was also in Ghana last year. And if I tell you protocols and safety and all of those measures were in place, people respected what the disease could have ravaged and done. However, I also noticed that there was, again, a real attention to protocol and people being careful. And there just wasn't all of that mayhem and that diabolical narrative that was pushed about even the travel advisories.
Mhm.
Don't go to these places and don't do business here and don't do this and that and the other. And when you step back and you look at really what the data showed us that those numbers were astronomical in other continents outside of Africa, wasn't there at
Mhm.
all. And so what that says to me is, and it's like I teach my students in class, Jermaine, I tell them knowledge is really benign. It just depends upon who has it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really kind of what navigates whether knowledge is a weapon or an asset, whatever it is. Knowledge is benign. It just depends upon whose hands it's in. And so, with that being said, um, knowing what's happening on the continent versus looking at it through other narratives, people can then start to design these pictures in their head about where they do business, where they don't do business, who's trustworthy, who's not, all based upon this little block that we call a television and media. And so I go the long way around to say this. If you truly want to know what's happening on the continent, do your research, connect with the people, connect with the leadership, connect with businesses who are doing business there. How about this? Travel. Go there yourself, put your boots on the ground and do your own due diligence. What I found in my travels to Ghana is that it really is a wide open opportunity for logistics and business and innovation to come in and partner with the resources and the people there to truly build something special. But we have to be careful in the diaspora that we do not always buy into other people's narratives. Who wins if the diaspora is disconnected from the continent? You
Right.
have to now ask yourself that question: who wins? And
Okay.
then who loses?
Exactly. And I've spent a considerable amount of time here in the States, and on TV you hear statements like the best in the world. Everything in America is the best in the world.
Mhm.
Um, Baseball finals is called World Series. Meanwhile, all the teams are United States. The dream team, basketball team, the best in the world. Only for what I think a small country like Puerto Rico once smoked the dream team. Okay, and so when you live in a country where everything is projected as best in the world and everything else elsewhere is inferior to this, it's pretty difficult to start to believe, not to believe the narrative, isn't it?
Well, I think it depends upon who you speak to. So interestingly, and I'm probably going to get into some controversial waters here, but interestingly, I believe the black diaspora, the African American diaspora, really does move in and out of two worlds, where we understand the propaganda, if you will, that goes along with the American narrative. But so many of us, while we've achieved wonderful levels of success, right, generational successes,
Mhm.
there are still those inadequacies or there's inequalities that keep us walking in realism, where we don't always bite the carrot that's dangled before us. Oh, best, where does the term best in class come from? So when you define American business, and I truly believe I am a best in class business, not because of the American narrative, but because of the passion, the acumen, the work, the logistics, the branding, and just the blood, sweat, and tears that I've invested in my business makes me best in class when you compare me to other brands. Now, but you cannot say simply because I am an American business, that alone makes me best in class.
There you
And
go.
so I think that the African American diaspora, again, we have the benefit of looking in both mirrors. And so when we go and we travel and we're treated as Americans, and sometimes that has some benefits that come with it. And it
Mhm.
depends upon where you go, it can be a challenge. So we navigate and we negotiate these two worlds where we benefit many times from the description of American owned business,
Mhm.
but then the same America that we do business with, we do not always benefit from the advantages of being an American business. So it brings us back now to a place of realism where we have to look, in my mind, it's time now to look into other areas of where can we truly have the opportunity to have a level as you can have it, playing field when it comes to real economic development. And that's why I'm encouraging people to look at Ghana.
Okay, talking about Ghana, why is everybody
Mhm.
going to Ghana?
I can't speak for everybody. I can tell you And that's another trap that we in the diaspora fall into, trying to speak for everybody. We are not a monolith.
I know.
We are a
Well,
very, yeah.
I mean, let me clarify.
Come
Clarify.
on, come
Every
on.
time I hear somebody going to Africa, I mean, of course, I'm
Hmm.
using the word everybody very generously, but it
Yes.
seems like Ghana is a very attractive target or destination.
Yeah.
What, what,
Yeah.
what do you think that is?
Well, let me tell you my personal story and the
Mhm,
stories that I have garnered and gleaned from. So, the first area of attraction for me
mhm.
was when His Excellency, the President, Nana Addo, I believe I'm pronouncing his last name correctly,
Akufo-Addo, right?
yes, gave the invitation of the return. Now, for those of us who would consider, I don't know if I would call myself a Pan Africanist because there's a lot of political baggage that goes with that, but I am certainly pro continent, pro diaspora. So I will take on that.
Then you
So
were in,
hearing,
then you were DNT. There you go.
absolutely. And we'll get into that, I hope, in some part of the conversation. But there was such synergy there, even in our first conversation, that I really appreciated. But hearing that invitation come from the continent, from a head of state, from a man who is sitting in this lofty, elevated political, social world stage of a place, speak with his megaphone out to the world and say, everybody of African descent, whether you're in the Caribbean, whether you're in the US, South America, Europe, wherever you find yourself, we are now inviting you to come back home. The doors are now open. Now, while many can trace, and I'm going to give historical context again because of the diaspora, right? While many have the benefit of knowing um, who their people are in antiquity, right? You can trace your family back, not to these European lines that have been drawn on the map, but truly trace your way back to the origins of family bloodline. And then to talk to a people who have had that opportunity now erased from historical record in some cases, where we're now having to piece that together. To have him say, don't um, consider yourself just a wanderer culturally anymore. You're no longer a wanderer culturally. We invite you back here. Find your culture, your footing, your grounding here. It sent shockwaves through me and through many of the business leaders that I've worked with. Now, for those of us who've been in global business for some time, primarily what we've called global business hitherto has been doing business with Europe
Hmm,
and
hmm,
doing business with Mexico, right?
hmm,
And I'm speaking
hmm,
from my personal experience.
hmm,
That's where those 30 countries come into play. Most of them have been in Europe and in South America. But
hmm.
to hear this African head of state say, you can find your place here. Now, when I go to Europe and I go to South America, or whether it's literally or virtually, seldom did I find the same kind of resonation.
Hmm,
When
hmm.
I heard that though, I heard it, and my daughter said something that I'm going to coin for her. She said, "Mommy, sometimes our DNA remembers what our mind forgets." This
That's
child is
what.
20.
Well, hold on, hold on. Repeat that.
Yeah, I got you too, huh?
Repeat that. Our
She
DNA.
said, "Our DNA remembers what our mind forgets."
Wow, powerful, powerful.
Indeed.
And
Now,
how
I
old is
wish
she?
I could. Well, she just had her 21st birthday.
I
I
can
am
tell she's
blessed.
way smarter than I was when I was 20. But go ahead.
I'm blessed. I'm blessed. And I would say she's light years ahead of her mother too. And I have to remain relevant in order to
Catch
keep
up.
that kind of genius here. I
Right.
gotta stay relevant. She keeps me my 13-year-old son as well. They keep me on my toes. But that resonates because again, when he said that, my DNA remembered what my mind never knew. I knew I had to get there. And so after hearing that kind of invitation, instantly my thought process was, not only do I want to go back, but how do I bring my wealth, my acumen, my experience back to this land, not just the man, but this land that has invited me home.
Oh, wow.
It's customary when we travel that you don't ever return without gifts,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So when you go home, you take gifts. So for me, it was the gift of acumen, the gift of experience, the gift of wealth, the gift of infrastructure, the gift of education, the gift of network. How do I bring all of that back and give to this land that has invited me home? So, you ask why Ghana? Tell me any other African head of state that has said to the diaspora, come home.
Wow. Okay. So now you get electrified by this statement and you get on a plane and you land in
Mhm.
Ghana. Was that your first trip to the continent?
It was.
Okay.
It was.
And so you land in Ghana. Then
Far
what?
from my last, though.
I know,
Yes.
I know. But when you landed in Ghana,
Yes.
how did it feel like?
Um, it was overwhelming for me because I had started to do my family's history and found out that my family history was tied to Ghana, the Gold Coast then. The name was changed, but my family's line was tied to the Gold Coast and tied to Benin and some of those areas that are now present day Ghana. And so for me, while others were kind of looking around and they were happy to be there, for me, it was overwhelming. It was spiritual in many cases. It was extremely emotional. Um, and it took me a day or two just to stop. And I hate to say this because people, will think you're kind of new agey and you're kooky when you say this, but hear me on a deeper level. I had to literally stop vibrating long enough to kind of calm down to really take in what was happening. When you look at this again from the historical context, when you think about the gates of no return,
Mhm.
where our ancestors were told by Jesuit priests that the curse on you is not only will you not return, but you will forget your name. You will forget your people. You will forget your culture. You'll forget your God. You'll forget your community, your marriage, your children, your food, your language, your medicine, your education. You will forget it all and you will go out and you will be a commodity to the world. That was the curse that was spoken by the Jesuit priests. Do your research. I did that research. But then for me to go back after that was supposed to be a done deal. We were never supposed to return. Marcus Garvey tried. We didn't make it happen there. Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X tried with the UN. Didn't happen there. But in 2019, people will say it was arbitrary. I believe it was God Almighty that spoke to the president to open those doors and then spark this revival in the diaspora that now may be the time that we can I'm getting chills, that we can truly go home. And so for me to have that knowledge and then go back through the same doors that were supposed to be eternally closed to me from a cultural, spiritual experience, to go back through those doors, it took some time to totally come to grips with that, to digest that, and to really let that sink into my DNA that only God holds my destiny, not a man. Now,
Wow.
that's a whole different message.
Wow. And I like the fact that you're bringing wealth. And most people who might think, well, that, oh, she's bringing a whole ton of bucket full of money. But that's
Mhm.
not, I presume that's not what you refer to as wealth necessarily, but wealth of everything else, knowledge and access and everything that you're bringing to the table. But I
Systems
have
and the
to,
dollar, too.
that, well, of course, that one too.
Yes.
But I have to ask you this:
Yes.
the age-old convention is that to do
Hmm.
business with somebody, you have to know
Hmm.
each other. Do
Hmm.
you think Africans on the continent
Hmm.
and Africans in the diaspora really know each other?
That's a very good question. And I think we do not have a simple answer to that because of the time and the cultural imprint that has been laid on the diaspora. So many people have laid claim to the diaspora, imprinting their cultural stamp, if you will. And because we or the diaspora has been in survival mode for hundreds of years, some of that had to be, what's the word I want to use? Digested and assumed as our own as a way of surviving these different areas. So do we truly know each other? Again, I go back to the statement that my daughter gave. Sometimes the DNA remembers what the mind forgets, but we still have to address what the mind knows. And so the mind knows some very similar places, but I think there are very diverse understandings of the world because we're seeing the world from two very different lenses in many cases.
Hmm.
And so it's a very complex answer, but I would say this: I think we have more in common than not. And I think now we are open now to having a very honest dialogue about what this looks like. Now that we're talking about a coming together, what does it honestly look like? It's kind of like a marriage, Jermaine. You don't have a healthy marriage if you come to the table with the veneer,
Hmm.
right? You always have your best stuff on. You always have on your lashes and your makeup. If you're a woman, you come with that and you come with your best presentation. But lasting relationships and marriages happen when you have the courage to discuss the dirt behind the doors, right? Can we now have an honest conversation about that? So I think now the continent and the diaspora are coming to a meeting where now both are courageous enough and vulnerable enough and willing enough to talk about what is behind the closed door, because both of us see that coming together, particularly economically, is much more advantageous than us remaining separate.
The veneer that you talked about and the need to come clean and be ourselves so
Mhm.
that we can truly understand it. It reminds me of a movie that I actually incidentally watched just last night that they pitched named Liam Nielsen, I think.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and he was a bank robber, stole a lot of money. And
Mm.
he met this girl that he completely fell for this girl. And he said he called the FBI to turn himself in and return the
Mm.
money because from his perspective, I have to go into this relationship as clean as possible with nothing hidden. And
Mhm.
so when you
Mm.
told me about us coming together with some type of veneer on, yes, it is natural for us to look at the positive aspect of uh, the African diaspora, although it's not a monolithic group. And
Right.
also, and the same applies to Africans on the continent.
Right.
Do you worry that if we try to take the shield off
Mhm.
and come clean with everything totally bare, we're
Mhm.
not going to scare each other off?
There is nothing scarier than what each of us have already endured. There's nothing scarier or more scary than what we've already endured apart. I would encourage us to risk the coming together. You look at the colonialism that has happened on the continent and how it has ravaged the continent of its people, resources, and the genius. We're not just talking about the resources in the ground, but the genius in acumen. I keep going back to that word, experience and knowledge. Look at again what has happened in the diaspora with enslavement and Jim Crow and voting right. And we can go down the line with the atrocities there.
And it seemed
What
to
we
be
have,
even getting worse on this side of the Atlantic.
and hence my clarion call. No, seriously, hence my clarion call to look to the East, look to where we have more in common. If we're going to risk anything, why not risk it with the people that we have more in common with than with those we do not? So, while yes, it's going to be tricky, it's risky, it's going to be hurtful, we're going to see a lot under there in many facets that we would probably prefer not to, but I go back to choose your pain. We have already
Pick your
endured
poison.
so much. Pick it. So we've endured so much apart. What if? we endure pain and it works? What if we choose to be vulnerable enough to say, I'm responsible for this? Well, I'm responsible for this. I admit this. How do we fix this? What happens if we have those honest conversations and we stop looking to Europe and South America and Russia and China and some of these other places to build the continent, and we look at the genius, the resources, the power, the networks, the economies that we do have in-house, in continent, and we choose to use our God-given genius and connection to build that? What if it finally works in our lifetime? I think that's a risk, Jermaine, that I'm willing to stake my life on. I'm willing to put some blood in that because I see what has happened generationally without it, with people who have operated in fear for a lot of legitimate reasons, mind you, but have operated in fear, staying apart. I think it's time to now risk it.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, here's the incentive to risk it.
Mhm.
You, as a successful African American woman living in Houston,
Mhm.
Texas, no matter how far you go, you're still looked upon within the imaginary context of Africa, the continent. So, which means until and unless Africa is fixed up, it's going to reflect in how you are looked at by everybody else. Why
In
don't we
many
get that?
cases, I don't know. But I think there is this awakening that's happening where people are having some real conversations with themselves about, okay, so I'm here and I'm in this context. What do I do with this context? Generationally, it has been this. Oh, there we go. There, all of my notifications. Pardon me there. But we've been within this context for so long, and we know what this context is like. We know what the workings, the trappings, the boundaries of this context, what this looks like. Is it now time for us to make some very real and sometimes difficult decisions about changing our context and owning that, no longer giving the definition of that context to other people, but saying, all right, here I'm at this point in my life where I'm not begging for new customers. I'm not begging for new clients. I'm not begging for my brand to be accepted by everybody. I want this body. And so we have to get to a place where we take the realism and the connection with ourselves sometimes, and I'm going to define what I mean by that. But we separate ourselves and our experiences many times from the operation of business, not fully understanding that business is about bringing our total selves to the table in a relationship that brings about commerce. But it's the relationship with ourselves and with our business partners first that then yield the commerce that we all can benefit from. So I think the business leader now is having a paradigm shift in who they want to attract, what they're willing to risk. Am I at a place now where legacy is more important to me than selling short myself for the next contract? Is this legacy piece more important to me now than smiling and whitewashing the veneer? And I use that whitewashing. Y'all know what I mean by that. Coats, whatever you want to call it. What's more important to me now? I'll tell you what took me to Ghana and what has me now pursuing my mother continent. My son is 13. He is tall, he's strapping, he is a good looking young man. He's brilliant, he's exquisite, if I must say so myself. I love my,
Think
and
you're
that
just
tells you now,
describing yourself, but go ahead.
okay, that's fine, that's fine. He has good genes, he has good genes. Um, but looking at now my beautiful son and my beautiful daughter, and I know what they can give to the world, putting that now in the backdrop of what happened in 2020 with the civil uprisings and the political uprisings and the marches, and all of the young men who have inadvertently found themselves in precarious situations where their lives are now at risk. For no, I mean, and some of them, and we're not going to whitewash that either. We're not going to say that each and every one of them were law-abiding citizens shot down in the street. But what we are going to say is due process did not happen.
Of
Can
course.
we just say that?
The same
So
way it
due
happens
process,
with other people.
there you go. So it did not happen. So they were not given the same opportunities of due process in
Mhm,
a democratic society.
mhm.
And so for me as a mother, I'm not looking for someone to define the future for my son.
No.
As his mother, I'm looking at now, and as the mother of my daughter, who will graduate college next May with an engineering degree, she can write her own ticket in the world. But as her mother, I'm always looking for opportunities to trailblaze for them so that they have the opportunities to be the fullest expression of themselves. So what do I mean by that? There is pain everywhere you go in the diaspora, and I would even say on the continent, right? But when we look at what do we have now at our disposal to create the society we want to create, there
Mhm.
is more in my hand to create with than not.
Okay.
So it just makes good sense for me and to me for the diaspora and for the continent to now start to have these conversations.
Interestingly, we got on this interview to talk about your project Roar, and here we
Yes,
are discussing social philosophy. But
I bring all of it to the table.
let's put that on the table. Let's get to Project Roar. First of
Yes,
all, what's the name and what's it about?
roar. So what I'm hoping happens every time you say roar,
Mhm.
there is
I
this
should
this
roar.
you get it. You get it. You absolutely get it. So it's a part of my persona. I am a lioness at heart. And so this organization started out as a women's global leadership forum,
Mhm,
really targeting some really specific areas for women globally. Particularly, economic development has always been there, but land ownership for women globally.
mhm,
My team we've done a lot of research extensively, pardon me, on women who were blessed to attain generational wealth and what that looks like versus women in global populations who did not, and what role did land ownership and the transference of land and business have impacting their overall well-being. So that was one of our causes. Another cause was Day of the Girl Child with the UN, October the 11th. Every October 11th, the UN turns its attention to girl marriages and girls' education, and how do we now address some of the atrocities that have happened in some pretty remote places with girls who were not given the opportunities to go to school, have formal education, but were given away in child marriage, and what that looked like. Well, in operation since, oh God almighty, 2012, and went through all of those years right around 2018. We took a
mhm,
pause because I needed to kind of step back and really become clear again about what ROAR was all about. We had pushed for legislation for women to get funding for their businesses. We had lobbied the UN for legislation, travel. We've done so many things from a philanthropic standpoint. I was then looking at, okay, the philanthropy is good, but how do we make real impact? And so I stepped back for a while. And in that stepping back, said, there's a lot happening socially. So I never left my political science degree on the table. Even though I was in business, that political science piece was always there. So I had to step back a little bit and say, we need more allies at the table. Men, our allies in the diaspora, are dealing with some of the same issues that we're out here pressing about. But here's the thing, I stepped back and we did some research. More money was going into women owned Black businesses than male Black businesses.
of
And
course.
so that opened up a whole different conversation for me about the disparities within our community economically. If you empower the women, but don't empower the men, you still keep the family divided. And you and I know generational wealth happens when families are united, not divided. So I stepped back and said, well, it's time to bring the lions into the lioness den. So we rebranded everything to now make it an inclusive organization where we're not just dealing with women globally, but now we're looking at Black America and not America, I would say the diaspora for a more clearer term. Economically, how do we build? And so when we talk about economics, we have to bring in family. That brings in culture, that brings in education, that brings in the children. And so now Roar Global has truly become a global hub, if you will, of economic, social, cultural, and now we're going to say transatlantic development in our people. So that's what, and we launched it with our conference in August of this year.
How did it go?
Gangbusters. It was awesome, of course. And I say that kind of in a flippant way, but I'm honored. We hosted a king from, I will not, please go to roarglobal.org to get everyone's names, get all of the speakers who participated. But we were featured in 4 continents. Now we have gone global. We have the analytics. We are truly on all 7 continents with the conference. People everywhere in the world have heard about Roar Global. So I am honored with that. And we don't want the momentum to slow down. We are hosting a trade mission to Ghana in June 2023. After my daughter graduates from college, we're going to Ghana to then have a trade mission and now start to keep this momentum going to connect business, culture, and family with the continent.
I'll be shocked if your daughter is not on that trip.
Oh, she is already so on that trip. She's already said, Mommy, after I get my diploma, we get on a flight, we're gone. We are out of here. And so we may be there a month in country before the trade mission. But yeah,
absolutely.
Everybody's going to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. When you took a step back in 2018, when did you resuscitate it?
It was actually this year.
Okay.
It was actually this year. 2018, then we had 2019, 2020, 2021. There was just so much going on there. And
I think the global history, besides health, I think the years 2020 and 2021 can just be erased from, because nothing happened during those.
Well, I think it was a shaking in understanding. I don't know if we saw. I don't know. I'll take issue with nothing happened. There was a lot of paradigm shifts and norms that were shaken there. And so while I agree.
You know what? Yeah. Actually, you're right. It seemed like the world paused. But during the pause, it's almost like a reboot. The world rebooted
exactly that.
Itself. And I've seen a different posture in Black people around the world. And to be honest with you, for me personally, what it did to me on the continent, when I saw that our natural herbs are more powerful than the Western medication and my question is, in post-pandemic, are we developing that? Because I can tell you this, in 2020, all of 2020, I was stuck in Ghana, right? I was there. And so I didn't see my family in virtually the whole year. The first opportunity that I got to come in, I think I was transiting in Brussels, Belgium. And my flight, they had to change my flight instead of going to DC to Chicago. And these 2 Belgian ladies who were working on my tickets, they were asking me about the pandemic in Ghana. And then I said, oh yeah, we have everything. We have neem leaves. He said, what, neem leaves? Then she took a pen and paper and she started taking notes. What? Tell me about it. I'm like, wow, okay. So they know about neem leaves and they want to know about it.
Yes.
But what do we do with it in Africa? I don't know. What do we do?
Well, that's what now again, I do not pretend to speak for everyone in the diaspora or everyone on the continent, but I can speak from personal experience. What I see is logistics, systems. We have access to everything that heals. I had a friend of mine, and now I call him a friend of mine in Ghana, who says, if you throw trash outside, if you throw like food trash outside, sooner or later, it will grow a garden
Yeah.
because the soil is so rich.
Yes. Yes.
And so
And we're
I thought
hungry.
about that. Yeah. Yes. And but see, what we're doing here, even in this conversation, is painting the necessity of the overall larger conversation about the potential of the continent put with the potential of the diaspora. What can truly happen? What I have seen is its logistics need to be in place, infrastructure, systems, and what have we learned in the diaspora? Logistics, systems. And I'm not saying that they're not already there. I'm saying that enhancement and partnership can come now to expand what is happening there. But I think there is a real need now for the best of us to come together and have these conversations about what do you bring to the table. We know that herbs that heal the body, heal the spirit, um, all of that. We can find that throughout the continent, right? And the beauty industry alone is a multi-billion-dollar industry. What can happen with shea butter? And I'm talking to a shea farmer now to go into partnership with him to help buy half of his operation to build up the logistics there and create now import export for those products to come into the beauty industry globally. It's not a lack of initiative, it's not a lack of resource, it's a lack of logistics and systems. And so that's what I'm finding, right?
But to create
Um,
but to create those partnerships and logistics and systems, don't we
mhm,
go back to our earlier conversation about the paradigm piece? Because look,
mhm.
here in
Yes,
Houston,
yes.
and I know you met Arikana. When I first met Dr. Arikana, she said in my first interview with her, she said, a black man opens a store in a black neighborhood, and a Chinese man opens a store in the same black neighborhood selling the exact same things. The community will patronize a Chinese store more than they would the black owned store. And you would think this is a problem with this side of the Atlantic. Nope. In Ghana, like your friend told you, you throw anything on the ground, it grows in some fertile soil. It's organic. It heals the body when you eat it. But guess what? We insist on importing rice from other places that are grown with the. What does that tell you about the mind?
It tells me that the Willie Lynch syndrome and the poisoning of colonialism is alive and well. And the only antidote for all of that is that we heal ourselves. The mindset is real, it is pervasive, it has been persistent, and it's 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 a it's a cancer in us that we really do have to heal and eradicate.
But we've known
Um,
about
I,
this cancer for ages.
but
That's my for of
yeah,
all the things that I'm impatient about. That's what it is.
yes,
It's we had an excuse when we weren't educated. We had an excuse when we
yes,
didn't know better. Now we do.
yes.
So what's our excuse now?
I can't answer for them. But you know what, Jermaine, we have to get to a place too where we're okay with not everyone having the mindset and the awakening we have, and they stay there. But for those of us who are saying we're done with it, and I no longer want to live in a state of impatience, I want to go create it, we kind of galvanize our efforts and we go do that. Again, when emancipation happened, some people chose to stay. When the colonial rule was removed from certain aspects of the continent of Africa, some people choose to still operate within those systems and paradigms.
Oh,
I
I'll bet
cannot speak for,
I'll give you better. On the continent today,
okay,
you have people calling that the white men should come and rule our countries again. I kid you not.
that's painful. That is truly painful to hear. But I'm not surprised. I've talked to many African business leaders who are excited about the Chinese and the Indian business leaders buying up land, buying up resources, but no Ghanaians have been hired, or very few Ghanaians have been hired in those logistics. So they're coming in, they're buying up the resources, but have the local economies been refreshed, renewed, or revived because of that? No. The Chinese have banking in Ghana. The Indians have banking in Ghana. It's now time for the African American to have banking in Ghana. That's one of the reasons I want to do the trade mission. Why? We need to provide an alternative, in my mind, to what has been the status quo, the quid pro quo, the norm. We provide an alternative of excellence in business, excellence in quality. And while we may not win over everybody initially, there are some that I have found there is this appetite, there is this desire to have these kinds of conversations. Now, we're going to have to deal with equity, and we're going to have to deal with cultural norms in business, and we're going to have to deal with logistics and integrity in business.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
have to deal with that because
Mm-hmm.
that's a thing, and we need to deal with the integrity piece of
Mm-hmm.
that. But to say that um, the environment is void of that kind of desire for cooperation, no, not at all. I hear it, I see it, I'm working with it. And so while we may not win over everybody, I believe we will win the majority. When we provide those solutions, when people find out that working with us really works, I think it will provide them the opportunity for some different conversations.
You know, I'm
I'm always
sure.
the hopeful.
I know. We have to be.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
then the reality is this. You have a
Yes.
favorite restaurant, right? You
Mhm,
go there every day, or not
mhm.
every day, periodically. And the
Okay.
service that you expect every time. The one time, maybe the 20th time that you went there, that the service was bad. Which do you remember and which do you tell your friends about? The 20th time or the previous 19 times?
It's human conditioning to talk about the negative. But again, I go back to my statement though of ownership of your context. That's an individual choice that we now have to make. Do we focus on the one time it didn't work, or do we focus on the 20 times that it did? It's I go back to the analogy of a marriage. Do you put your spouse away because this one time he burned the biscuits or she didn't balance the checkbook? No, you look at in the grander scheme of things, more has worked with you than without you. So I'm going to keep here working with you. It's personal, it's personal ownership of our context. And I think
So,
here is where we have the opportunity to strip now again that crutch from, oh, we can't do this because of this. We can't do this because the white man this or that. We can now strip that back and give that ownership right back. So now the choice is yours. You know it's not going to be perfect. Do you choose to work with this and see it all the way through, knowing there are going to be hiccups in the system, knowing there are going to be logistical failures, knowing there are going to be some disappointments, some delays, whatever it is, but knowing in the grander scheme of things, if we continue to pursue this, this will work. It's about personal context and personal ownership for me.
on the flight to Ghana, right?
Mhm.
When you looked at the passenger manifest, the people on that flight, if you remember, how
I
many
do.
Black people were on that flight and how many non-Blacks were on that flight, percentage-wise, roughly?
It was, there were far more Black people on my flight going into country.
Okay, all right.
There were a few who, but there were far more Black people on that flight, Black and African people on that flight.
So was the was were blacks did the blacks amount to 50% plus or under 50%?
I'd say it was about 40, 60.
40, 60. So
Mm-hmm,
blacks 40 and non-blacks 60, you would say.
mm-hmm,
Okay. So here's my thing.
Mhm.
And I mean, I'm saying this, I'll give you the opportunity for the last word, but here's my perspective. Okay. The same people who do everything in their mind to get you, Charity Smith, an African American, and me, Jermaine and Chroma, born and raised on the continent, to misunderstand each other, to discourage you from coming to Africa. They are on a flight going to Africa. To do what? Okay.
Benefit from that breakdown in communication and understanding. It go
So,
back, but it goes back to what we were talking about, though. Knowledge is benign until it's in the hands of someone. Someone wins, someone loses, but knowledge itself is benign.
yeah,
We have to educate ourselves with
yeah.
what this is all
So
about.
if the
Yes,
place
please.
was so, if the place was so messed up and everybody's dishonest, what are they rushing there in droves to go do? To go help the continent? And then we still believe that, oh, I don't trust you because so and so and so. Oh, and then from this side of the Atlantic, oh, if we go down here, there's a lot of crime. Let me tell you something. The law and order, we all know, doesn't work as crisp as it works over here. We know that.
Mhm.
But here's the thing, if people would commit crime in an environment where the law and order is more certain to catch you, versus people will commit crime where the law and order is not as certain to catch them, who is more criminal minded?
That is an astounding analogy. I get it. And when you put it within that context, again, we have to step back and take a deeper look at personal context and decision. Who are you going to choose to believe? Where will you put your value? Um, and you paint again a very what's the word I'm looking for? It's compelling, a very compelling analogy with that. We are at a point now, I think, again, where we are stepping back and saying it can't be as bad as we've been told. I'm talking about the diaspora. It can't be as bad as we've been told. It simply just because, again, if there was no value there, why are the Chinese climbing over each other to get there?
Mm-hmm.
Why won't Europe release its colonial hold on the continent?
Mm-hmm.
Why, even after Ghana has gained its independence, why is there still? Why are we still part of any Commonwealth at all? Why?
Don't get me
Why?
started. Don't get me started
I
on
will
this.
not. And it was an hour show. I promise to stay within my context. So if we go over, Jermaine, it's on you. But so that's my point, though. So if there is no good in the place,
Mm-hmm.
why have there been these interjections and interferences in the continent politically, economically, socially for hundreds of years if there is no value? It's time, and I believe we step back and say, wait a minute, somebody wins and somebody loses if we as the diaspora stay disengaged.
That's it.
Somebody wins,
That's it.
somebody loses if we are disengaged. And we have kind of been the variable in this whole conversation. When you talk about colonialism, when you talk about global, well, this is not a political show. I have to remember that. But my
No,
point with all of
feel
that,
free.
no,
Feel free to go.
no. Well,
No, no.
I have
Seriously.
friends.
No, let me
Yes,
tell you.
yes.
The DNT was formed to hold the necessary conversations, the
Hmm.
elephants in the room we want to tackle. Okay,
Yes,
because you mentioned something about colonial hold on Africa.
yes.
It's a legitimate thing. Yes, we know enough now to be able to sit down and strategize to overcome that. But there's no discounting the foreign interest in how it plans to perpetuate the ongoing push down. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and when you look on this side of the Atlantic in the United States, they,
Mm-hmm.
they've gone over backwards to paint a picture of a Black American community that's inferior, doesn't know what to do and everything, and yet they keep the knee down. Well, if the person is so inferior and uncompetitive, level the playing field. Let's see what happens. Okay. But we know what's going to happen. And so these are conversations that we don't mind having because they need to be had. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So in the final analysis, I want you to look in the camera and talk to your brothers and sisters, not only in America,
Yes.
but around the world who are of the African descent. Talk
Mm-hmm.
to them about the Africa that you found and what you recommend that they.
I don't want to romanticize it, but I have to say that while it is not romantic, it is extremely spiritual. And I go back to again what my daughter said in her infinite wisdom, in the God part of her. Your DNA remembers what your mind forgets. Risk is everywhere, but I would ask you in the diaspora, look at the risks you're taking in business every day. Look at the funding risks, look at the collateral risks, look at the societal risks, look at the political risks. We have elections that are coming up. Will your life be any better in voting than it has been in past years? Now, see, some of you will say, oh, here you go with that again. No, I'm asking, look at your life, whether the White House was blue or the White House is red. The White House has never been black. And I know you're going to say, well, we had one president. One. How did your life move forward? The plight of the African American in those 8 years did not move forward. Other communities did, yours still did not. So now it's time in my mind for us to have a real serious conversation about what do you want your life to look like post that information. You cannot unsee what you've already seen. You
Hmm.
cannot unknow what you already know. You know this. So now it's a decision. Is the nail that you're laying on comfortable enough that you can adjust your pain and stay? Or are you ready to finally get up off of the nail and say, you know what? I'm going to be an explorer. I'm going to be a trailblazer. I'm going to try this. All of life has to deal with individual accountability and context. That's really what life is. Life is a series of choices that we have the courage to make. I invite you to have the courage to make a decision that will potentially change the trajectory of your family from here until infinity, until God comes and gets us all. I really encourage you, look at the continent of Africa. Look at free trade now that's opening up. We didn't have a chance to talk about that. Perhaps we'll have a 2.0 conversation about that. But African trade, the African trade agreement now is opening up. Is it perfect? No. But it opens the opportunity now for you to look at your investments here in the US and now put it in an economy that's emerging to truly become a contributor to the economy that not only changes your life, but changes the lives of your fellow Ghanaians or wherever you choose to go. So I implore you to start to look at, do you want status quo or do you want to blaze your own trail? And so I've always been a bit of a frontiers woman. I'm ready to try it. And I think now we're in an environment where we see with COVID, we have nothing to lose. Life is fleeting, right? With all of the pandemics that are happening, life is fleeting. Do you want to take the risk of staying here, getting more of what, and not to say that everything is bad, but it will never be equal.
You know what? This interview has been illuminating. I want to thank you. And when you mentioned that we put one Black person in the White House, I quickly picked up my calculator and did some maths.
Mm-hmm.
One Black president out of 46
Mm-hmm.
presidents. We're pitching 2.2% representation. The
In the
African
history
American,
of the country.
right. In the history of the country, yes. The African American population is 13%. So if 13% of the people have put just what 2.2% of the president and we're happy with that, fine. Let's go back to Africa. Africa is home to 34% of resources that the world needs, home to 17.5% of the world's population, but accounts for 40% of the world's poor. If we're happy with that, let's go right on. But I tell you, when you subject these things to numbers, numbers would never lie to you. And for me, that's what gets me going. And when I look at all these, you put it all together, and there are people here who say, well, it's too difficult. Why should I? Look, I've got my Bentley here. I got my, I'm living a good life. Why should I stress myself? Well, the reason the young police officer can give you a reason just like that. He could be driving right down the street away from your neighborhood, and they'll pull you over and make you feel like you don't have any business driving that kind of car. You don't have any business living in this neighborhood. Okay. So for us to put it together, Black people around the world, we're doing things, we're excelling at an individual level, but we have to put it together as a collective unit. Otherwise, our trials and tribulation would never end.
Well said.
I want to thank you, Charity Smith, Miss Mogul,
My
and
honor, my pleasure.
founder and CEO of Roar. And I have a feeling this is not going to be our last conversation.
I hope not.
Very good. All right. Thanks for appearing on Diaspora Network Television. Have a good night.